In today's Neville Goddard conversation, we will discuss thinking fourth dimensionally. So he says, now it is time to control our imagination and attention. By control, I do not mean restraint by willpower, but rather cultivation through love and compassion. With so much of the world in discord, we cannot possibly emphasize too strongly the power of imaginative love. I had the opportunity many years ago, I believe it was 2011, as one of my IT clients, the Toronto Child Psychoanalytic Program. And I would go in and I would host these sessions in which they would have various students connecting from different parts of Canada. And they would have various professionals and instructors come in and teach these events and workshops. What I got to do was provide the technical support, and I got to see it. Now, this was very synchronistic for me because I've always been fascinated by this concept of fourth dimensional thinking and really understanding how people get to where they are based on their own internal conversations, inner interpretations. Through the exposure that I had to these conversations that were playing out, I gained a lot of insight into my own psychology. And much of the information that was discussed in there was distinctly parallel to a lot of what we do in leadership, consulting, business, and so forth. So it fascinated me, and I found that it also helped me in my own entrepreneurial endeavors to identify certain thought processes that I was identifying with unconsciously, that was recreating itself in the experiences, unnecessary convolution on the day-to-day journey. I distinctly remember some conversations that I had with one individual that I connected with, who I was referred to by someone who was connected with the organization, in which I helped him with a number of his online initiatives. His name is Dr. Rafael Lopez Corvo. Some might know who he is. I recommend looking him up, checking out his work. He's a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, and a psychoanalyst. He's a former associate professor at Ottawa and McGill Universities and program director of Child and Adolescents Unite at the Douglas Hospital, McGill University in Montreal, Canada. Although I was helping him with his initiatives, I couldn't help but ask him a lot of questions about his process and his experience. And he has many years of experience. He taught me a lot of things, which still, till this day, ring true as I go about having these inner dialogues within myself and conversations with others. I always say that one thing leads to the next, and in the last video we talked about listening to the soul and guiding you on this journey to revealing your purpose. One of the questions that I get asked is, how do you find your purpose? How do you find your vision? The simple answer that I give almost universally is, what do you desire right now? Just commit to that and see it all the way till completion. Through the process, you're going to learn yourself. And through the process of learning yourself, you actualize who you're really meant to be. And after you have accomplished that goal or vision, the next one will show up, and you'll continue to build on the foundation of previous successes. And you'll be able to look back at your journey and cross-reference and see how all these things from your past were contributing to where you are today, laying the foundation for the person that you are going to become. Now, this is an example of an inner conversation that I have, thinking fourth dimensionally, when I refer to my past or when I refer to anything that shows up on the journey. And thanks to the conversations that we've been having in regards to fourth dimensional thinking, which I learned from Neville Goddard, which, by the way, I did a video on a while back. I'll put a link in the description to it. Thanks to these conversations, I further practice maintaining the ideal inner conversation. Because as he states, As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. As a man imagines, so is he. Hold fast to love in your imagination. Love is the thought process in relation to whatever it is that we are experiencing on the day-to-day journey. As we had discussed in the last video, Ralph Waldo Trine suggested that the soul and the physical existence is related by thought. And what we want is the ideal thought that brings forth our ideal visions, what we desire to see brought forth. Through the process, we learn about ourselves. We call this self-realization. And we embody those thought processes. We call this the identity, the self-image, self-actualization. And then we become what we imagine to be true, as he says here. By creating an ideal within your mental sphere, you can approximate yourself to this ideal image till you become one and the same with it, thereby transforming yourself into it, or rather, absorbing its qualities into the very core of your being. He says, never, never lose sight of the power that is within you. This imaginative power, our ability to carry on this inner dialogue, thinking fourth dimensionally from the ideal, which means reinterpreting, reimagining, revising whatever shows up on the journey, and see it in harmony and in contribution to your vision. This is who you are destined to become. He says, imaginative love lifts the invisible into sight and gives us water in the desert. It builds for the soul for its only fit abiding place. Beauty, love, and all of good are the garden, but imaginative love is the way into the garden. So he outlines a very simple process, and this is the maintaining the inner dialogue that's in harmony with the vision, which we've been discussing through many different perspectives all throughout the videos, in which the parallels I've seen in the conversations that I had with Raphael related to our vision, who we're destined to be, and fourth dimensional inner conversation. As Neville Goddard states, sow an imaginary conversation, you reap an act. Sow an act, you reap a habit. Sow a habit, you reap a character. Sow a character, you reap a destiny. So we're sowing this habit in our mind via our inner conversations, what we are thinking about whatever it is that shows up in relation to ourselves and how we relate to whatever it is that shows up, which includes the people, the environment, the circumstance, the information that is presented to us, and so forth. We become what we imagine as a result of the consistent imagining and reimagining in relation to our vision, the ideal. What would it look like if it were true? Is something that Neville Goddard says very often. Well, if it was true, you would see whatever it is that shows up as part of the journey to realizing your vision. A lot of times it seems easier that we can look at it from a perspective of hindsight. When I look back at my journey, I realize that all these experiences that I had brought me to where I am right now, in which I share these conversations from the perspective of deeper understanding. Although I never went deep into the areas of what was discussed formally in those programs that I had the opportunity to sit in, provide the technical support for, and listen in attentively as insights and perspectives were gathered. I did find the parallels for whatever was related to the world of consulting, entrepreneurship, leadership, and any kinds of business dealings involving others. And one of the core attributes that I found is exactly what he's referring to, which is, as he says, by control of imagination, I do not mean restraint by willpower, but rather cultivation through love and compassion. It's essentially looking at reality from the perspective of love. He says, by imagination, we are reaping our destinies, whether they be good, bad, or indifferent. Imagination has full power of objective realization, and every stage of man's progress or regression is made by the exercise of imagination. Let us affirm to ourselves that we are what we imagine. If we persist in the assumption that we are what we wish to be, we will become transformed into that which we have imagined ourselves to be. We are born by a natural miracle of love, and for a brief space of time, our needs were all another's care. In that simple truth lies the secret of life. Except by love, we cannot truly live at all. So a suggestion is made. So he says, we hear much of the humble man, the meek man. But what is meant by a meek man? He is not poor and groveling, the proverbial doormat, as he is generally conceived to be. Men who make themselves as worms in their own sight have lost the vision of the life into the likeness of which it is true purpose of the Spirit to transform this life. Men should take their measurements not from life as they see, but from men like Dr. Milken, and he's referring to someone that he was giving an example from, which I'll put a link in the description to that lecture, and you can take a look at it, who, while poor and unproven, dared to assume, I have a lavish, steady, dependable income consistent with integrity and mutual benefit. So let's look at that. That's actually a really good inner dialogue affirmation. I have a lavish, steady, dependable income consistent with integrity and mutual benefit. He says such men are the meek of the Gospels, the men who inherit the earth. Any concept of self less than the best robs us of the earth. The promise is, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. In the original text, the word translates as meek is the opposite of the words resentful or angry. A meek man is a self-disciplined man. He is so disciplined, he sees only the finest. He thinks only the best. He is one who fulfills the suggestion. So what is this suggestion that he's referring to? It is this: whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. So this is what we're referring to when it comes to fourth dimensional thinking from the perspective of the ideal vision, what we desire to see brought forth, and who we are destined to become. Through this process of thinking these thoughts from the perspective of love, we find ourselves relating to whatever shows up on the journey from the perspective of love. Challenge is met and is overcome. We're able to see things from different perspectives when we have a thought process of whatever it is that is presenting itself right now is not holding me back from achieving my vision, actualizing my ideal vision, but rather providing me an opportunity to realize about myself. What am I thinking? What am I imagining? This is defining the relationship of whatever it is that I'm connecting to, experiencing. And if this relationship or these interpretations aren't from the perspective of love, I have the power to change it and live from this suggestion. To that effect, he says, we rise to a higher level of consciousness, not because we have curbed our passions, but because we have cultivated our virtues. So one of the things that I have noticed about myself, as well as many others on this journey, is when we commit to a goal and see it all the way to completion, we go through this process, which I refer to as purification of the mind. We release ourselves from certain thinking, and we assign ourselves automatically, it seems, inner dialogue, inner conversation that is in harmony from the perspective of love, more so with things that show up. And we transform. We actually, as he says here, rise up to higher levels of consciousness through the process of actually moving forward with what we desire. Someone has a goal. When I look back at these stories, it was a desire for entrepreneurial success. That's why I started the business in 2009 and had faith that some way, somehow, it was going to work out. And it did. And when I look back at the journey, and I transitioned from doing the IT stuff, moved into other areas of business. However, been a full-time entrepreneur since 2009. I look back at the journey now, which is really 11 years, and I could see all the different bridge of incidents and these stories and the people that I met that laid the foundation and contributed in the most direct and indirect ways to the next vision. Because when you get to the destination, you change. You become who you are really meant to be. As mentioned in the last video, the soul guides us. Recommend watching it. So as stated, he says, we rise to a higher level of consciousness, not because we have curbed our passions, but because we have cultivated our virtues, which happens on the journey. This purification happens on the journey to a vision. We always suggest this, is who you become on the journey to realizing your vision, as well as enjoying the fruits of your journey, which is the realization of the vision. And then in retrospect, enjoying the experiences. When you look back at them, you're able to value them even more. And at times what I like to do is actually go back to those experiences of the journey that I had and actually relive them again in my imagination. And I start to pick up even more details of things, for whatever the reason may be. I didn't notice it at that time. But that information stands out, such as certain conversations, such as certain experiences that I had with people. And I realized that they were teaching me far more things than at that time I was ready to receive. But right now, I'm ready to receive it. So I'm able to go back into the past in my imagination and relive those experiences and further learn what I needed to learn. This is very powerful, which is similar to, for example, when you read a book. Let's say you take a book like As a Man Thinketh, or one of my favorites, The Master Key System by Charles Haanel. You apply the principles, you bring forth your vision. One of the things that you'll notice is if you go back to the book, is you'll start to pick up things that you might not have seen the first time. And you repeat the process again on your next vision, on your next goal. And then you go back to the same book or the same information, and then you start to pick up even more. This is based on rising up to higher levels of consciousness. He says, in truth, a meek man is a man in complete control of his moods. And his moods are the highest, for he knows he must keep a high mood if he would walk with the highest. So let's look at this from the idea of perspective. Perspective, or higher levels of perspective, allows us to see more connections, allows us to see and experience even more nuances of the different attributes that are related to each part of what Neville shared in his discussions, which is why I actually like to revisit his information regularly, because I've recognized that I can keep going back to this information and I can understand it even more. And what I found is that the understanding is experience, or the deeper levels of understanding is experience through the process of applying the information, picking a goal, and seeing it all the way to completion. And this is an opportunity, because what happens is the inner dialogue, the thinking, plays out. What is in the unconscious plays out on the journey to realizing our vision. And when it's brought to the surface, either through experience or circumstance, or through our own inner dialogue, from a place of lack, from a place outside of love, we have the opportunity to then change that inner dialogue to bring it back into one of love. For example, a person has a team member and they're looking to build a relationship with this team member because they work together on a project. One of the challenges that they find is some kind of theater based on past interpretations of working with other team members in their past playing out in this relationship with this team member, in which they then see the opportunity not from a place of love, but rather from a place of frustration, which then throws them off. They find themselves being disconnected and frustrated. Now, we've been learning that one of the things we want to recognize first is to not shame ourselves or blame ourselves, but rather see it as an opportunity to readjust our inner conversations, what we are imagining. And the person then starts to see that person that they're working with more from a perspective of love. They start to have an inner dialogue, such as, every time I connect with this person, I'm noticing that the relationship becomes more harmonious. We're actually getting better and better each day, working together in a team environment. I'm starting to become a better leader. I recognize this person is actually developing me to bring forth a higher degree of leadership skills, team building skills, communication skills, and so forth. And thus I appreciate them. So what they're doing in there is they're carrying on a fourth dimensional inner conversation, imaginal scenes. They're imagining that person from the perspective of love. And what happens is the relationship transforms. Day by day as they go in, they notice that the relationship transforms. Or sometimes the relationship transforms right after the imaginal act. I've had both experiences happen, but regardless, what I always aim to do is maintain that kind of inner conversation, which is one with the vision. And through the process, we integrate the suggestion, as he refers to. Whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on those things. So these are the opportunities that we have each day to maintain this thinking fourth dimensionally from the perspective of love in relation to our vision, in relation to harmony. And as a result, we go back here because this is what is really happening. We're sowing an imaginary conversation. You reap an act. Sow an act, you reap a habit. Sow a habit, you reap a character. Sow a character, you reap your destiny. Now let's go ahead and conclude this with an affirmation to further instill these valuable understandings that we're able to uncover as we continue on this journey, as we further build this relationship with what Neville has shared with us. We can say, I realize that I am self-disciplined. This is revealed but by my ability to see the finest and to think the best about myself and others on the journey from the perspective of love in harmony with my vision. I'm able to observe things from the perspective of truth. And through the thoughts of what is lovely and in harmony to my vision in relation to whatever shows up on my experience, I'm able to observe myself elevate to a higher degree of perspective, to find the ways that were always there, to bring forth my vision from the perspective of harmony and bliss. Through this elevation of consciousness, I cultivate my virtues. I'm able to maintain a state of mind and adjust my moods to the highest. I recognize that in the process of elevating to the highest and keeping my mood at the highest, I walk with the highest and carry myself with a self-confidence that demonstrates the power that is within me. I realize that imagination lifts the invisible into sight, transforming all in mind to beauty, love, in the garden of the mind, as it reflects as habit, character, and destiny. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.